Good evening, everyone. So my name's Lawrencia. I'm a software developer and also a member of Ladies of Code. So thanks for taking your time out this evening to join us for our test-driven development introduction and myth-busting workshop. So I wanted to briefly outline the agenda for today. So the idea was that this would be an interactive session and a chance for us all to learn together a bit more about test-driven development. So to start off with, we all go through our experiences of test-driven development. So that's me and Sarah. And then there will be an interactive test-driven development myth-busting section. Afterwards, I'll briefly just explain the history behind test-driven development and explain the concepts so that you can practice it for yourself. And then finally, there will be a coding task, which will give you the opportunity to practice test-driven development. So I've created a little short icebreaker on Mentimeter. Okay, so the first question is, I just wanted to know what everyone's experiences of test-driven development is so far. So I wanted to know like what words come to your mind when you hear about test-driven development. So there are lots of words about software and testing. So yeah, test-driven development is a method that you can use to develop software. So that's correct. And I guess it's a method you could use as well to design. It's a process that you can follow, which will help you design code. And practicing and refactoring is one of the steps of test-driven development.
I like the pain and the slur. But also the worth it. It makes it sound like the gym, which is actually a very good analogy.
Yeah. I guess it's a good analogy because with practice, you can become better. Yeah. Yeah. And the next question was, do you know what test-driven development is? But it's fine if you don't know what it is because that's the point of the session. So hopefully by the end of the session, everyone will know a little bit more about it and become a lot more comfortable in practicing it. And the last question is, do you practice test-driven development either at work or maybe when you're learning how to code? And this is something that you use whilst developing code at the moment? I guess it's a mixture. So hopefully after today, a lot more people will start using test-driven development. So leading on from the last question on the quiz, I briefly wanted to talk about my experience using test-driven development, and then later on, Sarah will talk about her experience. So I currently work as a software developer. I've been working in technology for just over 3 years now. I work at Sky and I work mostly in web technologies. So I build web applications using programming languages such as TypeScript and Python. So I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in test-driven development, but it's something that I am actively trying to practice and learn more about and do more often. I think it's a useful tool that I use, which helps me develop software. So I use it both in front end and back end development. So I think it helps it helps me develop code which is modular and breaks down problems into smaller problems. So I find it a lot easier if I'm developing a function which has specific business requirements than writing the tests first. Sometimes helps me think about the problem and plan it out a bit better. I think the first time I heard about test-driven development was around the same time when I was first learning how to code. So um, after I graduated university, I did a coding boot camp, and we learned how to develop web applications using React. And then that's when I first heard about test-driven development. So to start off with, it was quite complicated learning how to write tests first, especially with using a framework such as React. But over time, I think it helped me learn a bit more about the React framework, and it helped me test my understanding of React. And Sarah, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so my experience, I guess, started with testing. It took my colleagues a full year to convince me to use unit tests. So that was problem roadblock number one. I was quite adamant that I didn't need to use this tool. And then when I got to learn about TDD, which is doing test first, I learned about it through a session process meetup called a code retreat. And this was about doing katas, where you practice writing the test first, and then you do the kata for a certain amount of time, and then you have to delete your code and do the next session from scratch again. And I got quite upset the first time I had to do that, and I had to delete my code. And yeah, I would say I had a really rough introduction to writing tests first. But that being said, once I learned it and I accepted the kata and deleted my code and learned how to practice tests first, it changed my life completely. It really helped me think about the problem much more than I found that I'd ever thought about it before. And it was really, really eye-opening. So I've now been using TDD for maybe 7 or 8 years, and I don't know how to go back. I also wouldn't call myself an expert. To me, it's a lifelong practice, but it does get better and it does get quicker. And I'm not understating it when I say it's really changed the quality of my work and my satisfaction at my job, and just general enjoyment of coding, really. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And so next we have another Menti activity. So this time it's called Fact or Fiction. We want to bust a few myths about test-driven development. So one of like the common conceptions is that you'll write perfect code if you use test-driven development. So we want to know if people currently agree or disagree with this statement. So I would agree with most people who disagree. So test-driven development is a tool, and you can still write bad code by writing the test first.
Yeah, totally agree. It would be nice if we could write perfect code with it, though.
And so the next one is there'll be no need for QA, so quality assurance. So yeah, same, I disagree as well, because test-driven development is more for writing unit tests. And there are also lots of different types of testing that you can do on your software. And maybe the QA team would be doing that other types of software, as well as there are some things which test-driven development might not make sense for. For example, if you were trying to work on the task to do with maybe concurrency or like security, maybe that approach would not really make sense.
Yeah, totally. I think this was one of the first things I heard about when TDD started getting talked about more. And I feel like it's said by folks who really don't understand either. And yeah, it's pretty disheartening to think that, you know, testers might have potentially lost some jobs over this idea that engineers could also write tests. Yeah, so I'm glad to see we're all on the same page here. It's good.
And the next one is you can use test-driven development even if you're learning to code. Yeah. I think I would also agree with everyone, because I believe it's more of a tool that you can use, and it's part of learning how to code. It's more of a technique. It might be difficult at first if you're learning how to code, because it's another thing to learn on top of learning the programming language, or on top of learning the framework. But over time, it should become a lot easier. The next one is you'll need to write all the tests before writing the production code. I think it looks like most people seem to disagree. I I think this is sort of a difficult question, because I also disagree, because I think with test-driven development, it's more of an iterative process. So you write the test and then the code, and then like you sort of using the tests to help you build the entire feature. So you don't need to have the final design in your head before you start writing the tests.
Yeah, I think this is an area that isn't always well explained. The idea is obviously to kind of have a test and you know, do one at a time. And it can be quite challenging when you're used to thinking about the design up front and having a lot of decisions made up front, to working in this other way. And I think another fear people have is they feel they might forget to do some tests, so they write them down. And I would say it's totally fine to write down scenarios that you want to do. You can even write the test and comment it out. The key is just to not try and make multiple tests pass at the same time, or not to add multiple tests at the same time. Obviously, as you go along, you're going to want all your tests to pass. So, yeah, but you don't need to try and make 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 new tests and make them pass at the same time, which would be quite challenging. And then you wouldn't get the benefit of working in small steps, which is something you kind of naturally get out of this process.
And the next one is I can write code faster without tests first.
We specifically made you choose yes or no. Might be a bit of a trick question.
I guess it's true that like it will be a lot faster if you don't have to write any tests or the test first because it's less lines of code you're writing, but it could be a trade-off. So in the short term, you're working faster, but in the long term, um, are you actually writing well-tested code or code without bugs? So maybe in the long term, it could slow you down.
Yeah, this was a tricky one, and it's one of the biggest complaints I kind of see about TDD. And I understand it, especially when you're learning it. You're used to kind of pumping out a design and writing a bunch of stuff and hooking it all up quite quickly, which you can't necessarily do when you're trying to build scenario by scenario. But this is definitely a short-term versus long-term thing, as you say, Lawrencia. It's you'll probably be faster the way you used to do something, and then learning to do TDD is slow for at least two reasons. One, you're having to write additional code because you're now writing a test, and two, you're practicing a new flow, a new way of working that you haven't done before, and that's going to slow you down. But the key here is if you compared yourself who doesn't learn and practice TDD to the you that does, I'm pretty sure you would find an exponential increase in your speed, because while you're writing all these tests, you're naturally regression testing your code. So if you write new functionality and you break old functionality, you'll know about it because you have tests. And then secondly, the longer you do this practice, the faster you'll get at it, and you won't be so slow at it anymore. I'm able to write out a lot of functionality quite quickly now with tests because I'm just so used to working like this. So yeah, bit of a trick question in the beginning. Yeah, you'll probably go slower, but once you've practiced it, and TDD is a practice, you'll find that you really do speed up, and your delivery will speed up as well because your quality improves.
The next one is once you know test-driven development, you should use it for everything. I think I would also disagree with this statement. Test-driven development, I think it's good for a lot of things, but I think I mentioned this earlier that it might not be the best for maybe certain types of development tasks, or I think it's ideally meant for like unit testing.
Yeah, so it definitely works quite well at unit level, and system level as well, like API. I've definitely seen folks try and write infrastructure as code with tests and console bash scripts with tests, and it's really fascinating. But I would say it's probably doesn't feel as natural. So if you want to try that out, don't let anybody stop you. But it's definitely, if you're new to TDD, I wouldn't start there. Definitely want to start with normal application code. And yeah, it's not a silver bullet, one size fits all kind of practice.
The TDD bash scripting sounds interesting to me. So you're right, too many tests practicing test-driven development. I think you could end up definitely writing too many tests, or maybe you could end up writing the wrong types of tests. For example, if you start writing tests to test maybe the implementation instead of the behavior of a feature, then you could end up writing too many tests. However, like part of test-driven development is a refactoring step. So after you after you write your code and then write the test, maybe you don't need those tests anymore, so you could remove them.
Absolutely. This was a lesson I learned quite late because I also found my tests piling up, and especially the beginning ones, they don't really serve so much of a purpose anymore. And a colleague said to me, well, just refactor them, just delete them if they're covered by another test. If you're refactoring, why not refactor your test code too? And it blew my mind because it did not occur to me that, of course, as much as I am caring for my production code, I can care for my tests and delete stuff there and refactor that too. So I think that's missed quite a lot. But yeah, tricky. That's why this is a tricky question. So good one.
Yeah, that's the end of our myth busting section. I guess everyone's probably wondering where test-driven development came from. Well, it was rediscovered by a computer scientist called Kent Beck back in the late 1990s. He said that he did not invent test-driven development, but he rediscovered it because he read the description of test-driven development in a very old programming book. So a long time ago, with very old computers, there was this system where you could use like paper, like tape with holes in it. It's called like paper punch tape. And you'd feed it into a computer to like load a program. And in that very old book, it said that you take the input tape, manually type in the output tape you expect, then program until the actual output tape matches the expected output. And so he thought about that concept when Ken Beck thought about it when he was developing the first unit testing framework in Smalltalk. And he remembered reading about that in a book and he tried it out. And he talked about that concept to other older programmers. And they told him, like, of course, how else could you program? So he was very like passionate about test-driven development, and he later developed another framework called JUnit, which is like the Java testing framework. And he also created this book called Test-Driven Development by Example. So if you're interested to learn a lot more about test-driven development, I recommend that book. He said that the goal of test-driven development was to create clean code that works, because when you follow the process, it's the idea is that by writing a test, you're writing code which is predictable. And after writing the test, if you follow the refactoring process, it gives you the chance to learn from all of the lessons the code has to teach you, because you're quickly writing passable code first. And then over time, you can reflect on the code and refactor it later on. And he also mentioned that it's a way of managing fear during programming, because instead of thinking of developing the whole feature all at once, the idea is that you take action and think of the smallest step or the smallest solution I want to solve first, and write the testing code for that. And then it lets you get feedback as soon as possible. So how you actually follow test-driven development, the idea is that the design of the code or the design of the feature that you want to develop or the software you want to develop should be driven by writing automated tests. So, and the process is a cycle. It goes red, green, refactor. So first, the red step, you write a unit test. And then you write, the next step is a green step. So then you write just enough code which allows the test to pass. And then the next step would be the refactor step. So you have a passing code, but you can go back to the code and refactor it. Maybe look at how can I make this code more maintainable or more readable, or maybe more performant. And once you're happy with your refactoring, you then go back and write another unit test for the next like behavior you want to implement. So it's a cycle between test, code, refactor, and then test.
Yeah, spot on. I just want to mention one thing there around the red to green, which is I like to remind people that we want the test here to pass quickly. And this is where you get the distinction between what's happening in green and what's happening in refactor. Especially when you're learning, you might skip refactor quite a lot. And this practice can kind of lead to a bit of a bad habit later on. So when you're going from red to green, we're focusing on getting that test to pass as quickly as possible in whatever way kind of comes to mind first. Some people will even go really hardcore and say it should pass with like literally the bare minimum code, as in if the expected result is 1, then I'll return a 1, even though there's actually a calculation expected in the method. So you can definitely do that. That's not a problem. And in fact, that is an excellent way to practice small steps. TDD can be quite a challenging thing to learn when you're used to designing a lot of things up front, or you're used to over-engineering. I was a big over-engineerer because that's how I had been trained. I had been taught to think about every single class up front, every single object, how they might interact, and then to write up the code. And this practice is going to challenge that. So when you're going red to green, just get it working. And then when you're in the refactor space, you kind of step back and think about, okay, the code is functional, but how can I make it better in all the ways that Lawrencia mentioned?
Now it's your turn to practice coding with test-driven development.
Okay, great. So just for those who went on the session and are following the recording, we just came back from about a 40-minute kata session where we did the zombie kata, which was great. So yeah, just to wrap up, TDD can be extremely useful, but as we know, it's not a silver bullet or magic fix for everything. But don't let anyone stop you if you want to try it. Do it on your command line console bash script thing. Go for it. But it can be an extremely useful tool. It does take time to get used to it. So the key is really practice. I cannot underline or understate that word enough. It is a practice, and you have to practice it. Absolutely no way can you read a book or go to a session on TDD and be a pro. It will annoy you more than anything. Practice, practice, practice. And once it becomes a habit, it will become faster and faster and faster. And that slowness that concerned you in the beginning will be a thing of the past. So where do you go from here? So if you've never tried katas before, you've now learned what a kata is. It's a practice, a slimmed down practice project. So there's tons of those on the internet. I recommend using the ones that you start from scratch, not the ones that run inline necessarily on the browser. So start on your own machine and start from scratch there. Those are the best ones. Practice, practice, practice them. Try and delete them and start again, because what you're learning from the kata is not the knowledge, not the code. It's the knowledge. You're understanding more about the domain, and you're understanding your practice. I don't think I've ever done a kata the same way twice, because you always learn more about the problem space as you do them. So don't worry about it not looking the same as what you wrote before. And it's just for practice. No one's paying you. So if you want to experiment, if you want to take time, if you want to Google something, if you want to do it in a new language, go for it. It's your time. And then getting better at testing. So again, TDD is just a practice, kind of a way of doing things. It doesn't make up for the fact that there are different types of tests, that there are ways to write tests very well, that you still need knowledge about how to design code, and there are different types of tools that you need to wrangle as an engineer. So it's one practice among all the other things you have to learn, but what you get from it is a natural breakdown, a natural flow. And personally, this is what it's given me. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed the session, and I hope that we see you back again here at Layers of Code.